Hey, I'm Dan Perez, and in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about vertical kick trick terminology. If you've never heard of true kick terminology before, let me bring you up to speed. There are, at this very moment, two separate systems of terminology used to describe vertical kick tricks. To understand why this is, you need to know just a little bit about the history of martial arts tricking. In the old days, there was only what has come to be known as mainstream terminology. This was a set of nicknames based loosely on rotations, but not specific to takeoff, landing, or how that rotation occurred in a given kick trick. For example, we had the 540 kick, which was a cheat takeoff and a hyper round landing. And we had 720, which was a frontside pop takeoff with a standard hook landing, then a cheat 720, which described the 720 but using a cheat takeoff in place of the frontside pop. Later on, the term backside was integrated by legendary sport karate competitor and martial arts tricking pioneer Matt Emig to differentiate between pop kicks which began frontside versus in the opposite stance. Over time, mainstream terminology evolved to keep track of the various changes that were being realized as tricking continued to evolve along with its practitioners' understanding of the movements. A few months before the term backside appeared on the tricking scene, I created a separate system of terminology with a built-in stratification of techniques based on the concept that every vertical kick trick has a specific takeoff, rotation, and landing. I called this system True Kick Terminology, or TKT. At its inception, it was not as complete as it is today in accounting for some abstract use of positions unknown to the tricking community back in 2006, but its structure has remained essentially the same. To get a good understanding of TKT, we'll strip it down to just the core movements, or what would be considered the true kicks. That means we're starting with just a 2-foot or pop takeoff, and just standard round or hook landings. It works like this. When the trick begins from backside, the smallest incremental spin would be a 180 into a round kick landing. If you did a 360 instead, you get a hook landing, and for every 180 spin you add, you'll notice a pattern of alternating round and hook landings leading up to the current world record of an in-air 1260 plus round kick, set by Jordan Okubo in May 2015. To compare those to the mainstream names, you'd have at the bottom a trick which doesn't have a universal nickname, but could otherwise be a backside tornado kick. Following this exception, there is a relatively consistent pattern of nicknames which add exactly 360 to the in-air spin that is actually happening. Note the flaw in mainstream that a jump round cannot be a backside 540 because that's already reserved for a hyper landing, and a backside 360 would end up being 0 degrees in-air spin. Now let's check out the TKT for tricks which begin from frontside. The smallest spin is 180 hook instead of round, and one thing to notice is that the same pattern of alternating landings exists, with the landings switched compared to the backside kick tree, right up to the same world record which was matched when Mikael Mantis landed the first Pop 1260 hook. There is again consistency in mainstream if you this time create a rule along the lines of add 180 to the spin to come up with the nickname, with the same caveat below the 720 mark. Let's see what that's all about. So here's the Pop 720, and here's what should be the Pop 540, exactly 180 less. But that's the wrong landing, because a Pop 540 is a hyper round, which means it's the same rotation as the Pop 720. In mainstream terminology, it's the pop version of the 540 kick, which normally has a cheat takeoff. This brings us to an important acknowledgement. Mainstream has the benefit of being relatively concise in its language, but it's flawed in that it is inconsistent in its structure. Now let's rearrange those for true kick terminology. First we have a Pop 180 hook, then Pop 360 round, then Pop 540 hook, etc. Changing categories to backside, we have Pop 180 round, Pop 360 hook, Pop 540 round, etc. This progression of kick tricks, which always start from a pop and count 180 every time the kicking leg changes for landing, comprises the basis for true kick terminology. You're looking at the core list of true kicks, upon which all the other deviations are defined. In TKT, all other kick tricks are still these techniques, but with modifiers, such as hyper landings, gyros, variations, and of course the cheat and swing takeoff tags as alternates to the standard pop. Each modifier carries a rule about how it affects the rotation, which is nice because those rules always hold true. This brings us to the second important acknowledgement. True kick terminology has the benefit of being 100% consistent in its language, but its flaw is that it's cumbersome to use. For any kick trick, you can't just say, for example, Pop 720, as you would in mainstream, but rather the full 3-component sequence of takeoff, rotation, and landing, as in Pop 540 hook, instead. Using the modifiers cheat and swing account for the same base rotation of 540 degrees, where those alternate takeoffs still contribute 180 to the total rotation, but leave the remainder of 360 in-air spin to complete the technique. This part of TKT is comparable to mainstream in that the relationship between them stays consistent, even if the numbers don't add up correctly in mainstream. This is more apparent in observing the backside equivalence. The mainstream nickname 900 can be used to describe a backside pop, a step over, or a wrap takeoff. The problem is that the other takeoff position pairings, swing, cheat, and frontside, also have the nickname 900 for the round landing here, and those three have different rotational values by comparison. Switching back to TKT for a moment, we have just pop 540 round, cheat 540 round, and swing 540 round. Then pop 720 round, cheat 720 round, and swing 720 round for the frontside equivalents with the increased rotation. Very consistent, but more of a mouthful. The problem that arises with TKT is the math that goes into unraveling multiple modifiers, which speaks to the complexity of the language. A simpler solution then might be to ask, why not just lose the rules on those modifiers and use them purely as descriptive language? This question was first posed to me by this guy, Taimatsu, an original member of Team Aeroform back in 2007 and a vert kick aficionado in his own right. The answer is that doing so is not necessarily better, just complex in a different way. If you were instead to create a true rotation terminology, you could say that you would arrange the components of the kick tricks not with the attached rules like plus 180 degrees, minus 180 degrees, but that you would simply describe the technique based on what's happening in it. The flaw in this system is that you end up with accurate rotations, but inaccurate relationships. For example, though both in-air 360s, cheat 360 round hyper would not be the hypered version of a cheat 360 round, but rather a separate kick altogether. In this example, we're talking about a 540 kick and a wrap 9 to use mainstream terms. Or you could take that 540 kick and say, then let's suppose a cheat 180 round hyper is the hypered version of a cheat 180 round. Then the problem is you're using modifiers again, just like regular TKT. Doing it the first way, the math must be worked backward to determine the starting position, rather than rely upon the true kick progression used in TKT. So essentially, this system was not chosen because it had the combined flaws of both TKT and mainstream. So there remain two systems of terminology: mainstream for ease of use, and true kick terminology for precise descriptions. Both are inherently challenging to learn, in that the former requires memorization of arbitrary rules like 540 is the only rotation that is both round and hyper, otherwise half-spin intervals are rounds and full-spin intervals are hooks, except for 360, which is both hook and hyper and accurate in its rotation. Backside is minus 360 degrees, frontside is minus 180, step over and wrap are the same as backside, swing and cheat are the same as frontside, hyper or turbo adds 180, etc., etc. The latter requires memorization of the basic structure of true kicks, together with learning how each term modifies those base rotations. Like anything worth learning, it will take some effort on your part. The important takeaway is not the names themselves, but in how your understanding translates to progress in your training or the training of your students. Thanks for watching, and I hope this video helps you appreciate vert kicking and tricking to a deeper level. For more of my breakdowns of tricking concepts, check out aeroformmat.com.